Okay, today I'm in northwest London with Graham Sharpe, and Graham was one of my first interviewees back in 2017. So thanks for being a guinea pig.
One of the guinea pigs, yeah. No change there then.
I can't believe it's that long since I've seen you, Graham. Well, thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us again. So how many books have you written since then?
Well, several as it happens, Simon, because now I'm officially retired from William Hill. I have to have something to fill the day with, and writing has always been my thing. And as we sit here, I'm hopeful that within probably a month, my book on the history of horse racing in the Channel Islands may well be published. I'm going over there in a few weeks' time, and the Derby meeting is a Sunday towards the end of July, and I'm very hopeful that we'll have copies of the book to sell there and then.
You're nothing if not prolific, Graham. Where do you find all the time? Is it something that just has to come out?
Simon, the only job I ever wanted to do was be a journalist, and the only thing I've ever done really is be a journalist one way or the other. And as most journalists will tell you, what they do is write. If there's an incentive of some money at the end of that writing process, so much the better. But if there's not, probably you still write something because it will come in handy one day.
Okay, you also do a little column for Star Sports.
Yes.
So I could better get that plug in. It's
the Sharp Mind
weekly
column, yeah, which I'm very pleased with.
But the main reason we're doing this interview is your latest current book, and this isn't a mispronunciation by me, PROSTrATE Cancer, the misunderstood male killer, which topic is prostate cancer.
Yeah, of course, the misunderstood refers to the little r, which often appears in the middle of the word, and it was something that I noted when I was first diagnosed with prostate cancer and began the process of undergoing the treatment. It's still, although during the course of my treatment I kept notes on what was happening because I had to sit in the waiting room for quite a long periods of time, and I thought, okay, might as well write about it, if only for a diary. And then when the time came to consider what my next commercial writing would be, I was asked by a publisher to submit 4 potential subject matters to him. And I had 3 without any problem at all, and the 4th I couldn't think of it, and I thought, I'll bung in prostate cancer. That won't get picked, but it makes the 4, and I sent them off to the publisher, and he came back and he said, we'll go with prostate cancer.
So how did you feel about that initially, having to relive it all again?
No, that wasn't a problem. I didn't find that a problem. At that point, I was through the process, really, so I knew that pretty much the worst that could be done to me had been done to me, and it would be cathartic in a way to write about it.
Okay, now it's a brutally honest account of your own treatment.
Well, it's a true account. I mean, some may consider it brutally honest. I think it's what it is, what it is, and there's nothing that it deals with that I and many, literally thousands of other people haven't had to go through. If they can go through it, so can I, and if I can go through it, so can you, if you're reading it and you think I might have some of those symptoms.
Now, you mentioned then that you started writing notes early on. Was that the writer in you just to help yourself, or were you sort of compelled to write a book? Or was the book an afterthought?
I never saw it as a book, but I have kept a diary for most of my adult life, and so I would be writing on waterpaper today, went to the shops or whatever. But then when I started having to commute to the hospital, which I had to do my radiotherapy, which was 39 courses of radiotherapy every day except for weekends. So I had to travel up to the hospital and wait in the hospital. And I thought, well, why not jot down how you're feeling at the time, and then if you ever want to look back on it, it'll be there. At that point, I had no intention whatsoever of turning that into a book or even an article.
Possibly the reason the publishers chose it. It is a disease that affects a huge number of men in the UK, well, the world.
Yeah, 1 in 8 men is likely to be diagnosed with prostate cancer at some time in their life. 1 in 4 ethnic men are likely to. And 1 in 2 interviews will have a plane flying overhead whilst they're being filmed.
Now, I'm guessing you don't hold anything back as far as description of the treatment goes. At least I'm guessing you don't, because
There's one where I do ask the reader to think for themselves what it must have been like. It was the one where I really didn't want to go into the absolute details.
I think I know the one you mean, yeah.
It was the one where I thought, is this really happening? Yes, it is. Okay, it's happening and you're surviving it. Carry on surviving.
Yeah, I mean, without going into any gory details, let's just say it would have been quite hard to keep your dignity during a lot of the treatment.
One of the messages that I make a point of mentioning fairly early is the fact that if and when you are diagnosed, not only for prostate cancer, but I think for any condition or disease, I think the most important advice I would ever offer anybody is park your dignity at the door. It's being done to you for your own good, not because they want to make you look undignified or feel undignified, and they don't. I can think of no point during the entire treatment where anybody that was involved in the treatment made me feel undignified, except, of course, for the gentleman who told me that I definitely did have prostate cancer once he could be bothered to stop his phone ringing and keep answering it.
Yeah. You've sort of written the book in a way that we're in no doubt as to what happens, apart from using a little bit of imagination in the worst parts. But you also sort of try and make light of it. There's a bit of gallows humour in there.
Yeah, I think that, again, I like to think it's part of my attitude to life, because most of the things that happen to you, you can't do anything to change the fact that they've happened to you, and usually you can't do much to change the fact that they're happening to you at the time they do. So I've always thought, well, try and make not necessarily a joke of it, but see the light side of whatever's happening, and look at it almost come out of your own body and look down on yourself and think, what's being done to you, how do you feel at the time, but how would you tell somebody else about that?
Now, do you think the thought that indignity might stop some men seeking the treatment? Should they spot the symptoms? And I assume you'd have some advice for them.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Apart from my barber, I think, who I mentioned in the book, whose daughter is actually a radiotherapy nurse that may well have treated me, because I've never actually officially met her, but I've spoken to her on the phone, and she worked at the hospital where I was being treated, and it was only when my barber happened to mention me one day when he had me in the chair, and it was him who does this, was saying, and that's when I told him that I'd had prostate cancer, and I said to him, have you ever been checked out? And he said, I've said several times they've tried to, but I've always made an excuse and not been. And I said, listen, Carl, I said, seriously, if you tell me that again when I come to see you, I'm going to get up out of this chair and walk out, and you'll lose a good tipper. I won't be coming back. I'll go somewhere else and get me barnet cut. I'm not sure whether he's taken the advice and done it.
Now, one of the things that struck me and shocked me, and it's quite surprising this bit shocked me because, quite like you said, some of the treatments are a bit shocking if you didn't know about it, is the fact that so many famous and successful men have suffered from prostate cancer, come out the other side, and also appear to have done so without being public.
Yeah, I think that's due to the fact that, and you could argue that it was me as well. The reason that I didn't want to tell anybody at the time was partly because I didn't want to bother them, but partly, I suppose, at the back of your mind is in case you don't come through it, or by telling people you're sort of making yourself out to be assuming that you're going to recover from it. So I can perhaps understand it, but it seems to me that most people who do come out, particularly famous people, will only do so after they've finished. But even then, they don't tell you much about what they've been through. They might say, it was a bit tough at times, blah, 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 but they tend to downplay the actual treatment. And so when I found out I had it, and I would notice these other people that were talking about it, I had talked about it, and I thought, tell me what it's going to be like. You've told me you've come through it, so great. I assume, it's doable, but you're probably being treated privately with the best possible doctors that you can decide upon and have it done wherever you want to have it done. But you haven't told me literally what's going to happen to me the first time I walk into a hospital to get some treatment. What's it going to be like, you know? And I thought, well, what's to stop me telling people what it's going to be like? I think that'll be helpful to them.
And that's a difficult question, but deep down in your heart of hearts, did you ever doubt that you were going to come out the other side of it?
No, I didn't. Oddly enough, I'm surprised at that, because I would say my usual mode of operation is to be pessimistic on the grounds that if it goes well, you're relieved, and if it doesn't, you expected it. But I never at any point really, because I think I told myself early on, listen, you've got no choice but to be treated. Just assume it's going to work. Well, you know, what's the downside of that?
So there's no sense of despair ever in your book from your account of it. But have you sort of airbrushed over the darker inner thoughts or moments you might have had at the time, or was it an honest?
I suppose, you know, as a bookmaker, you look at the stats initially and you say, okay, well, it's a 7 to 1 chance that I will at some point in my life have prostate cancer. How many 7 to 1 winners do I back? Not that many, to be honest. So probably you sort of park that possibility as a fairly unlikely one in the first place. And then if you do get it, again, looking purely at the odds, you are more likely to survive it than not. So I think you've got to, unless you are of that disposition that you always believe the worst of every situation that you're in. And as a supporter of Luton Town, that's what I tend to do. In life, I think you just go, okay, if it happens, it happens. What can I do about it? I can't stop it. And yes, it would be dreadful for my family and everybody else, but as I wasn't telling them, other than my wife, you know, I thought, no, I never at any point thought this is going to kill me.
And one of the lighter moments, the camaraderie amongst patients shone through. You formed some lasting relationships.
I've made some good friends, yeah. Of course, one of the worst elements of it, in a way, it was nothing to do with what I had, but it was being in a waiting room with other people, all waiting for radiotherapy, but for different reasons. You know, some with prostate cancer, a lot were not, and some of them were much younger than me. And the most poignant incident to me, in a way, was watching 2 relatively young girls discussing the wigs that they'd bought because they'd lost all their hair whilst they were having treatment, and listening to them, they were obviously uncertain about the outcome as well. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm 40 odd years older than these. I've had a life, you know. So what if the worst came to the worst? Nobody would be able to say, well, he didn't have a life, you know. But if the worst came to the worst for those girls, they won't have had a life. And you know, you looked around you and just thought, that puts my position into perspective. You know, I've got the odds in my favour of coming through this. They may not have.
And some of the descriptions of the other patients in the waiting room were quite humorous.
Well, I think that's just observational, isn't it? That's just looking at people, and they probably, if they were making it right in their own diaries, they probably thought the same about me. Who's that idiot with a black hat on that he's wearing, even though he's indoors? You know.
Well, whilst the book isn't what some people might describe as sort of entertaining in inverted commas, reading about other people's suffering, or yours, it is at the same time fascinating.
There are a lot of people who would like to read about me suffering, I can assure you.
Well, I read it in 2 sittings, so it was very gritty. It was a page turner in not a way you would expect. How's the book been received?
As an author, I think you find that most people that talk to you about the book are positive, because otherwise, you know, their own decency won't allow them to tell you, I thought that was rubbish, you know. Although I have had that in the past, but no, by and large, I've had the reaction that I hoped I would get from people of similar age who have, a couple have said to me that they've been to get themselves treated as a result. Others have said that it's made them think. So it's been positive. I've been grateful about that.
And has your experience with this changed the way you see life in general?
No, I wouldn't have. I don't think so. Really, I don't know in what way it would. I think it's because of the way that I probably see life that I wasn't over worried whilst I was going through the treatment. So I don't think it's changed me in that respect. But again, it's made me aware of the fact that most people at some point in their life, and hopefully when they're some way through it rather than closer to the beginning, will have to deal with some sort of medical emergency. And although probably the way you deal with it personally doesn't affect the ultimate outcome, it's probably much better to have a positive outlook than it is to have a negative one when you're going through it.
Well, with bookie speak, this is like it's going to have a long anti-post effect, because as time goes on, it's odds on this is going to save lives, isn't it, this book?
I hope so. Well, it won't in itself, obviously, but it
given the education,
it might do if X number of people get themselves checked out before otherwise they would. Again, and I would urge every man of a certain age, and that certain age is probably approaching 50, even if they've not noticed any untoward symptoms that might suggest anything is wrong, ask their GP the next time they see them, can I have a prostate cancer check? It'll be slightly undignified, I'm sure, the first one that you're given, but other than that, it's nothing to worry about. But if you then feel that you have some symptoms, and I would say the most important one to look out for is possibly blood in your urine, which appears to be something that you should always get checked out one way or t'other, then I know it's, at the moment as we speak, it's quite difficult to get a face-to-face appointment with your doctor, but it's probably not your face he wants to look at if you're going to be checked out for prostate cancer. Just do it. What's the problem? If they find out you might have it, then you've done yourself a favour. If they find out that you've got no symptoms whatsoever, you've done yourself a favour. So whichever way you look at it, you've done yourself a favour. Okay,
you just briefly back to your next book's about racing in the Channel Islands.
Yeah.
I assume the research was much more fun.
I suppose it's fair to say there have been one or two incidents when I've gone to Jersey that could be described in similar context to some of the things I went through with prostate cancer, but not many of them. It was something, when we first went there back in the 80s, when we had our first son, and we fancied taking him on holiday somewhere that wasn't in England, but that didn't have the dangers of the foreign sun, as it were, the potential sunburn and everything, and the travel, and with travelling with a young kid, and neither of us had ever been to the Channel Islands, so we said, why not give that a go? And we loved it when we went, and the fact that they had racing as well, both in Jersey and Guernsey. At the moment, Guernsey haven't raced for 2 or 3 years now, unfortunately. And it might be slight odds against that they do so any time in the imminent future. Whereas Jersey's season has already begun as we talk. They had their second meeting on Sunday, and there's a whole racing in Jersey goes way back, as it does in most parts of the UK. And from an early time, I thought there are books on every aspect of life in the Channel Islands. When you go there, you see them all in the shops, and I thought it's a matter of time before I find the book about the history of horse racing, Jersey and Guernsey, and there was no such thing. And eventually I approached the race club out there and said, look, would you object if an outsider wanted to write a book on the history of racing in Jersey? And no, in fact they said they would welcome it. And one chap in particular, his name's John Henwood, who should, and he knows it, and I've told him, written this book 10, 12, 15, 20 years ago, because he's a veteran of the Jersey scene, knows everything. He's been fantastically helpful to me. I think the book would be far less comprehensive than it is thanks to him, and I think he's given me a lot of the research that he was keeping in the event that he could ever motivate himself to write this book. But he probably found out it wasn't going to make him any money, so decided not to. And I'll probably find that out, but it doesn't matter. I've done it as a labour of love. It's the first book I've ever written where I haven't expected anybody to give me any money for doing that, and they haven't. So I just hope it's well received. You know, I think it chronicles a little part of the racing world. You know, so many people tell me, "Oh, I've been to every race course in the UK or Britain or England or whatever," and I always say to them, "Yeah, but you've probably missed 2 out, haven't you? Okay, maybe technically they're not part of the UK or Britain, but you know, there's Longcrest in Guernsey and Leyland in Jersey. And I think any racing fan that lives in England, Scotland, Wales or Ireland should make sure they go there at least once."
Okay, and have you sat down to write the next one?
There are 2 others that I have to imminently finish, which are due out at Christmas. I wouldn't call them great literary works. Really, I think my next serious book will be the follow-up to PROSTrATE Cancer, and I suspect my publishers can ask me for another 4 potential items of subject matter, and probably the one that I bung in at the end and think I don't really want to write this is the one that he's going to go for, but I've not got any idea what subject matter that will be.
Okay, we'll keep our eyes out for it.
It may well be a biography of Simon Nott, who knows.
That wouldn't sound many. Anyway, Graham Sharpe, thank you very much.
You're welcome.